doing things differently to break up the big banks, and he has launched a year-long plan to ensure big financial firms won't be bailed out by you, the taxpayer, again. The man behind the plan, to which he's just added one new component, joins me now in a Fox Business exclusive. Minneapolis Federal Reserve CEO and President Neel Kashkari. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Liz. It's great to be with you.
Great to have you. You just spoke to the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, and you had 3 points that you had already articulated a couple of weeks ago. Now you've added a fourth. I want to put up on our screen your original 3, and people will then see the fourth. You said you got to break up the big banks, increase capital requirements, meaning make sure they have more rainy day funds there, taxing leverage, so that sort of discourages risk, I would imagine. And here's the fourth, alternative resolution mechanisms. Mr. Kashkari, you need to tell me what that means.
Sure. Well, those are 4 options that experts have approached us with as ways of solving the too big to fail problem. And those are the 4 that we're studying right now, but we may be adding more in the future. We're keeping our minds open. That last one is, once a bank gets into trouble, how do we make sure that the government can allow it to fail without causing chaos in financial markets? I mean, you remember when Lehman Brothers failed, it almost brought down our financial system.
Sure.
And so the Dodd-Frank law, with its living will and the resolution mechanism built in there, is trying to allow banks to fail. We saw with the results of the living wills that the biggest banks, many of them, are still too big to fail. So some other experts have proposed, for example, new chapters of bankruptcy or other alternatives that could allow regulators to wind down a bank, to haircut their bondholders, keep it running, but not bring down the whole financial system. And this is a really complicated issue. We're trying to dig into a lot of detail to make sure that taxpayers are not on the hook and the financial system is sound and safe.
What do you worry about, Neel? And I ask because you watched and participated in post-financial crisis dealings to try and fix the situation. Please tell me what you see now that is extremely worrisome to you when it comes to the big financial institutions.
Well, the biggest risk right now that I'm worried about is just that we're running out of time. If we don't act while we still remember how bad the crisis was, I'm afraid we're going to turn the chapter on this. We're going to tell ourselves, hey, this problem can't happen again. And then 20, 30, 50 years from now, we may face another terrible crisis like we faced in 2008. As you know, societies tend to forget. Everybody moves on. We need to deal with the crisis once and for all, deal with the too big to fail issue, so that 20 or 50 years from now, we're not back in the same situation.
Everybody thought that Dodd-Frank would make sure and ensure, and we were actually promised this, that there wouldn't be too big to fail banks. And part of it was, folks, you guys running the big banks have to have bigger rainy day funds, known as capital requirements, meaning a lot of cash on the books. So I believe they had been at about 3% of shareholder capital. Now they've upped that to 6%, which is a lot of money to have as dry powder. Why isn't that enough? You say that needs to be raised. How much higher?
Well, one of our presenters from Stanford presented a plan that said it should be around 25%. You know, non-banks typically fund themselves with about 30% or more capital, and yet our banks are running at, single digits, mid-single digits. If they only make a minor mistake in some of their investment decisions, that capital can all be wiped out. And then if we don't have a situation that can allow them to fail, it's the taxpayers who have to step up.
Do you agree with that number, 25%? Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think it needs to be a lot higher. Again, just think about a minor mistake. A minor mistake a 5%, 6% mistake, and their capital's gone. And so I think it needs to be a lot higher than it is. But I don't want to prejudge. We need to look at all of the alternatives, do the cost and benefits, and then figure out what the right answer is. So we're only early in our process, but we're making good progress.
Before we go, the smaller guys, the regional banks, have been terribly affected by bigger bank regulation. They've been almost held to the same standards. Meantime, I think it was more than 500 regional and smaller banks went under during the financial crisis, and the world survived. Should they be excluded from some of these onerous plans that you, in your mind, have?
They should. I'm focused on the biggest banks, the systemically important banks that could bring down the financial system. My view is if we can really address the too big to fail issue, then I'm hopeful we can relax some of the regulations that are weighing down the small and mid-sized banks that are not at risk of bringing down the U.S. economy. I agree with you 100%.
Okay. Will you come back? We really appreciate your perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me.
Neel Kashkari, Minneapolis Fed President.